Longest. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Catherine, the COO here at Antavo. As we all know, marketing budgets are under more scrutiny than ever. Every pound, every dollar, every euro really needs to justify itself. And today we're talking about how to have that conversation with confidence. Joining me is Dave. He's a really experienced CMO. He's got 40 years in retail marketing, and he's led brands like Foot Locker and Champs Sports. He's also worked in .com pure plays, catalog, direct marketing, brick and mortar retail, and even spent some time in B2B. He spent the last 25 years of his career in C-suite roles for startups, private equity, and publicly held multinational retailers. And he's here today to share his vast knowledge with us. I actually met Dave previously, and if I could have met him earlier in my life, I feel like I would have been so much more successful in my other jobs because, I mean, really what Dave knows, you cannot buy. It's such fantastic information. And so we just had to get him on a webinar to come and share this with you. And then joining us from Antavo is Julia Filoso. She leads go-to-market, and she's worked with brands across fashion and hospitality on loyalty strategy, implemented many really successful loyalty schemes, and she now focuses on how we bring loyalty to market, including how to make its value make sense commercially. So we don't have long today. It's going to be a jam-packed event. So we're going to hand over to Dave, who's going to talk a bit about kind of the core tension that we have between the way marketers measure success in marketing language and the way that finance teams think in financial language. So yeah, I hope that sets the scene a bit. And Dave, I'm going to let you jump in.
Thanks, Catherine. Okay, so we're going to put this in the context of four conversations between the CFO and CMO that happen over time. I've done this multiple times. The transformation that comes from these four conversations typically takes more than a year, sometimes more than 2 years. It is a journey. So 4 pivotal conversations that are waypoints on this journey, and let's dive into it. So first of all, nothing that you're going to hear in this session today is theory. It is all things that I and my teams in various companies have executed, practically speaking, across all media channels and all forms of marketing influence. The thing I like to mention first here, because it's such a great setup, is this quote that's allegedly attributed to Peter Drucker: "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." And what we really mean by this is that culture is resistant to change. It's by the very nature of what culture is. If it's not resistant to change, then it's a fad or it's a trend, but it's not culture. So culture is resistant to change by nature, but if it's in an environment that lacks trust, it's naturally going to fail. It's going to fail because it won't operationalize even the most obvious strategic plans if there's no trust. And the trust has to be there between the CFO and CMO for culture to change and for strategy to be successful. And why is the trust not there? Well, these people are just so very different. As I said, or I should say, as Catherine mentioned, I've spent the last 2 decades or so in a marketing leadership role with various different retailers. And as a marketer, I'm always thinking about the future. I'm always thinking about where are our customers' tastes and preferences trending towards, whereas a CFO is always looking at the past. They have one correct version of the truth that they have to share with the street. They have to do it through generally accepted accounting practices or international financial reporting standards. And there is only one right way to report a single version of the past. And the single version of the past is defined from tens of thousands or millions of transactions. And the work that the CFO is doing is trying to find one correct version of the truth from all those transactions, whereas the CMO is building brand relevance with future customers, not just today's customers, but with future customers. So already you begin to see how antithetical these two roles are. The CFO is always trying to minimize risk and ensure precision because they have to report to the street. I personally have witnessed small errors, less than a percentage point of error, force a restatement in a publicly held company, which took the capital value of the company on the street down by about 80% in just one day. So the risk of imprecision or small errors is so great. The CFO is always going to be focused on precision, whereas the CMO is always focused on embracing risk and calculating the opportunity. Margin expansion and compliance are the definition of success, whereas in marketing, the share and brand equity is the definition of success. Emotional state is all about vigilance. Don't lose what we have. And the marketer is always thinking, what can we get? The math the data preference, deterministic, 1 + 1 = 2. It's very finite. Whereas the CMOs, it loves probabilities because there is no 1 + 1 = 2 when you're modeling the future. It's probabilistic. If X, then likely Y. This is why these two people are so different. And oftentimes I've heard this expression, maybe some of you have heard, that's marketing math. Well, marketing math is what we have to live with in marketing because we're always trying to divine the future. So how can we start these conversations? Well, the first thing we do is we get to conversation 0, and conversation 0 deals with customers. I know this type is small, but let me walk you through what you're looking at here. In the sections are broken down into customer counts. 12-month customers, these are the ones who bought last year and we're hoping will buy again this year. 13-month plus inactive are those who bought in the past but did not buy last year, and so we have to reactivate them this year. New customers aren't just what they sound like, those who have never bought from us ever before but are buying this year, and we total that up at the bottom of the grand total section. Now, in each of these sections, you see things like customers and buyers. Customers are those who bought from us previously. In the 12-month active section, customers would be those who bought last year. And buyers in that next row down would be those who are buying from us this year. If you divide A divided by B, you get retention rate, or B divided by A, you get churn rate. So it's the difference between customers and buyers at the end of the year. At the beginning of the year, you know how many customers you had last year. At the end of the year, you know how many buyers you have this year. Divide one by the other, and you get your retention rate, or the inverse would be your churn rate. Apply some unit economics, and you've got your sales per customer, orders per buyer, average order, things like that. This is the domain of accounting. It's very, very deeply immersed in customers, and so the marketing leader should be deeply immersed in it as well. But the hard work of getting one right version of the past is our accounting team's responsibility. So new and active and reactivated customers, these are facts. There's no debate about them. They are facts. You may have some resolution issues like did that order that got placed turn into a cancellation or a return? Yes, there's hard work there, and accounting does that. But this is our source material to say, what kind of job did we do? Sales, orders, gross margin are facts. Facts bring the temporality gap together. So that while the CFO is looking at the past, the CMO is looking at the future, we join hands at the customers. Now, let's take a look at the same data in the form of a P&L. Let's say, for example, there's $1 million in sales over the last week or the last month or the last quarter or year, whatever size company you are. There's some finite amount of sales. In those sales, we paid a portion of it towards the cost of goods sold, which yields gross margin. In this case, gross margin of $500,000 would be a 50% gross margin. And we spend money in marketing, whether it be media or loyalty programs or influencers or various forms of influence. I've intentionally used the word influence to not limit it to just media. We spend a certain amount in marketing to influence the customer behavior, and we end up with a yield, and this is called contribution. Contribution goes back to the CFO to fund everyone's salaries and rents and capital depreciation and so forth. From this effort here, we have a finite number of buyers. Finance tells us how many buyers were active last month. How many orders? So you can see 1.2 orders from almost 10,000 customers. That's about, well, it's 1.2 orders per period at $100 sales per buyer. It's about $83 or $84 per customer, minus the cost of goods sold and minus the media or the influence. We end up at $13, and this is actually $12.55. So it's about $13 in contribution per customer. So now we know what it looks like in the form of a P&L. So we now have the historical view of customers, and we have the current accounting period view of how the customers behave. So this is where our conversations can start. So the actions to get to our first pivotal conversation, the first waypoint on our journey, we've got to establish a common language. So establish customer facts with CFO and CMO can both align to. That's accounting's job. Customer facts move the culture from channels to customers. You will not transform your marketing organization unless you can leave. I should say not leave. You want to complement your channel reporting with customer reporting. We'll never leave channel reporting because it's where our comps are. We're always worried about how we did this time last year. So we'll always have channel reporting, and the channel reporting is an integral way of understanding our influence on customers, but we have to embrace customer reporting and its customer facts. That's a shared responsibility. Customer facts bridge temporality. What happened transitions naturally into what's next. Measuring the influence on acquisition, retention, and reactivation of customers is accounting. Their job is to measure that. Mastering that influence is marketing's job. And the way that we measure can be something that's shared. For example, we want to have last click. Yeah, maybe we want to have multi-click. Maybe we want to have lift studies. Maybe we want to have mixed media models. The methodology of measurement is something that we share, but mastering influence, that's marketing's job. Reporting on the results, that's accounting's job. Okay, here's where 90% at least of the US market is. My last role, I've worked with over 100 retailers, and I will tell you that 90% of the market in the US at least is still solidly based in last click attribution. Last click attribution is flawed for many reasons, but let's start with the most obvious. The single biggest gap in trust between the CFO and the CMO is when the CMO comes in and says, hey, we drove $1 million in sales last week. And the CFO says, well, wait a second, if I gave you no budget, would we have no sales? Well, of course, that's not true. That is the point at which trust breaks, because we all know that while this graph is perfectly lined up with sales on the vertical axis, media spend on the horizontal axis, and where they meet on the lower left corner, it's not zero sales. We know it's more than zero, but we don't start tracking sales until we spent media, and then there's clicks, and then Google Analytics tells us how many of those clicks turned into orders, and we can report something. But it's fundamentally flawed because sales don't start when we start spending media. Sales are happening before that. And furthermore, what do you do with all the clicks that preceded the last click in the same attribution window? There might be 3 or 4 clicks that precede the last one, but you only give credit to the last. We know that this is a fundamentally flawed, but yet this is where 90% of the market still is. So the first conversation we get to is between the CFO and CMOs. How much of the sales that you're reporting or claiming was actually incremental? What did you actually cause? And so through lift studies, or longer term through mixed media modeling, we can understand that before we spent the first penny, there was an inherent demand from the marketplace. Customers who knew us and were coming and buying again. There's word of mouth. There's lots of things that are happening to drive sales that we can't track. And so we have to find out what that is. There is a finite value there, and we can arrive at that through lift studies across all of our channels or other more advanced media attribution. But we know that that's not zero. So right off the bat, we know that the first last click attribution graph was wrong. So now we begin to look at, there is some component. If we're doing acquisition, there's awareness. If we're doing retention or reactivation, there might be loyalty. How do we quantify that? And so summarizing the first conversation, complement channel reporting with customer reporting. That's accounting's job. Establish incrementality factors for every channel. Again, I count on my accounting team to help me do that because there's one correct version of the past. But optimize spend only on what you caused, not what was attributed. That's where marketing comes in, because our job is to master influence. Our job is to master marketing and master media. So while we'll count on our accounting departments to help us hold up the scorecards at the end of each week and month, quarter, and year, the ability to pivot and respond to conduct hypotheses, run experiments, and learn continuously, that's marketing's job. If you're not doing lift experiments, you don't know to what degree your ROAS is inflated, and reporting marginal results enable marketing and finance reporting to align. It allows you to close the credibility gap. Second conversation, which is, was it profitable? So we get it back into this graph again. So in the previous graph, we said that there's a lift over an existent inherent value or volume of sales. But the line between point A, where we begin spending or influencing customers' purchase behavior, and the results at the end of the week or the month or quarter, is not a straight line. If it was a perfectly straight line, we'd never stop spending. So we know it intuitively that this line is not straight from point A to point B. So what is it? We do that through scale testing. Scale testing allows us to see that if we break our campaigns in any one given channel up into 4 different spend campaigns. So we may have a campaign around a piece of creative, but if we spend at 4 different volumes or 4 different target ROASs, if we're talking about paid search, we can begin to calculate that at 0 impressions over 1 customer, we have something. That's our Holdout study. At 1 impression per week, let's say, this is just an illustration, we get incremental sales resulting from that, and this is what we're influencing over the Holdout. At 2 impressions, again, just as an illustration, 2 impressions per customer per week, we get further influence, but at 4, we don't get further influence. So now we know where we need to stop spending. This is critical. This is so critical because now we begin to understand that we're only taking credit for what we influence. B, we're not overspending, because once you get past that 3rd point here, you're diluting profit. And so when you sit down with your CFO and you say, A, number one, I'm not taking credit for what I didn't cause. I'm only taking credit for what I caused over the baseline. And B, I'm managing my spend to not overspend and dilute profits. Talk about bringing two leaders together and forming a partnership based on trust. These first two conversations lay the foundation for all of the growth that will come after that. So just a quick summary, periodic scale testing ensures efficient spending, and scale testing ensures you optimally spend and move spend to other tactics. So it's not just about reducing your spend. So only spending on what's incremental and only spending up to the point of maximum efficiency. It's not about pulling money off the table. It's about pulling it off this campaign or off this channel and moving it to where you're not spending, moving it to media type and experiments that you haven't yet conducted. So let's move on to that next topic. The next topic then is, I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to hop in. I mean, Julia, we often have this conversation, don't we, about how sometimes the loyalty programs are inverted from where they should be. Did you just want to add any thoughts to that?
Yeah,
first
I mean,
conversation?
Everything that Dave just described is, I could just, summarize it in, it's the same in loyalty schemes, because it really is. I mean, typically you try to show the incremental impact that a loyalty scheme has by looking at the behavior of redeemers. So redeemers being those customers that are part of a loyalty program that are actively using rewards. Why? Because that's what determines whether someone is doing something that they would not otherwise have done. To the best of our knowledge, there will be always one element there that is customer behavior to the moment that we will never see, and that I think we need to embrace as well. But that behavior, that reward, has caused someone to do something that otherwise would not have been there. That's why redeemers are the most looked at segment to look at the impact of a loyalty program of growth. But I mean, the reality is that there is a point, and that's the very cool part of what Dave has been talking about in conversation number 2 here is, even in loyalty, when is it that changing behavior is becoming just eroding margin? So there is a point where you can't just hope to change behavior forever. Let me put it like that, especially when we just look at transactional behavior. The share of wallet that someone has on a specific product is not going to grow to the infinite and forever. We are just going to buy as many coffees or as many clothes or as much furniture, right? There is a limit to that, and there will always be a limit to that. So there's the point where you kind of have to balance, those rewards that are high cost and eroding margin with maybe something that is rather high perceived value, more status oriented, more belonging oriented, rather than something that is just going to erode your margin. And that's something that, loyalty schemes, if well done, tend to help with as well, compared to maybe just a one-off campaign. But yeah, it's never any conversation, I think, that we have with our customers as well.
I like to liken it a little bit to when you end up getting married, you probably don't get taken out to dinner and bought as many flowers.
Yeah.
But because also it's not required, once somebody's earned your loyalty, there's something else probably that, it's about inviting friends, giving friends discount. It doesn't necessarily mean that your most loyal customer needs money off, because the relationship has become about something different. They just prefer you, to shop with you. And so then you can look at what else you can do to deepen the relationship. It doesn't have to be that you erode your margin with that. And we do have quite a few questions, but I think that you might be answering some of them as we move into the next one. So I'm going to let you go through that, Dave, and I'll hit you with some questions afterwards. Oh, and Dave looks like he may have frozen.
I know, I thought it was a dramatic pause, but I don't think it's a dramatic pause. That's the beauty of being live.
It is great. So we'll let him drop off and drop back.
Here we are. That was quick.
Okay, it was. We thought you had a dramatic pause. So yeah, I'll hand over to you, Dave, because I think you're going to answer some of these questions in your slides.
Yes, I will happily do that. So let's dive into the P&L we showed a few minutes ago, breaking out the sales and cost of goods sold and so forth. But this time we're going to do it by new customers, brand new to the brand, versus repeat customers. Let's go through this step by step. So what we see in the first one, $1 million in sales, we saw this on the previous slide, $500,000 in cost of goods sold, resulting in $500,000 in gross margin. We spent 375 in influence, got 125 in contribution margin back to the company. Let's break it down in a little bit more detail here. Whoops, try it one more time here. So now we see if we use ROAS, that 375 divided by a million is 2.7 or 70%. But while it's a ROAS of 2.7, for customers, we see a 70% incrementality factor. What that means is that had we not spent the money, 70% of the sales would not have happened. So it's 70% incremental. And we established that through holdouts. Again, more long-term studies, we can do mixed media, but holdouts gets us a very quick answer, very, very fast. Within a week, you can get a pretty good feel. Your incremental ROAS then drops from 2.7 to 1.9, and your contribution drops to negative $25,000. So if we only take account of 70%, that drops our sales from $1 million to 700,000. At 50% gross margin, we're at 375, or I'm sorry, $350,000 in gross margin, but we spent 375. So now we're 25,000 in the hole. We got 1,000 customers, negative $25 per customer. Pretty straightforward math. Just means that ROAS told us one thing, but when we pulled the spend out that was not incremental, we ended up with a negative number. That's not necessarily a bad thing because we're talking about acquiring net new customers. So in this case, we would say our cost of acquisition, or CAC, is negative $25 per customer. Now, as we move on to marketing to existing customers, here we have $20 million in sales to existing customers because this is a mature business. The existing base of customers is 20 times the size of our brand new customers. Again, not unusual for a mature company. $10 million in gross margin, same gross margin, $1 million in spend. And then as we drop down into the influence section, we see that we had a ROAS of 20 with our existing customers, but only 20% incremental. This is the point. Our customers tend to be aware of our brand already. They already have preferences. They come back and buy from us again. Now, this is extreme just to illustrate a point. So not everyone's going to have 20% incrementality for existing retained customers and 70% for new, but it shows an illustration. Now, as we move this down, our original calculation without incrementality factor is 20. But when we apply the 20% incrementality, we're down to a 4 ROAS and $1 million in gross margin, 20,000 customers, and we're at $50 in positive contribution per customer. Now, this is really, really important. So I'm going to slow down here and just circle this box, or box these two numbers. If we think that when marketing to net new prospects for the first time, we're spending negative $25 per customer to acquire them, but when we market and influence our existing customer base, we yield $50 in profit or contribution per incremental contribution per customer. We have an interesting relationship here. This is the basis of the flywheel. If we were to argue that this was over the course of a year, we would have negative $25 from new customers per customer over the course of the year. But from our existing, we get 50. So if we divide the $50, we have a 6-month payback. So $25. And at the rate at which our existing customers are throwing off profit, we would recoup the $25 in 6 months and throw another $25 positive in the remaining 6 months of that year. So now we have a relationship where we're investing in the future, $25 to acquire a new customer, and we're paying that investment off in 6 months and throwing off profit in the remaining 6 months of the year. Now, there's a lot more accounting specifics here that I'm skipping because I want to illustrate the point. The point here is the flywheel. We don't want to position ourselves in marketing as purely a discretionary expense, purely an obligatory discretionary expense. We want to position the acquisition of new customers as the investment in the future of our brand, and we can pay that off in a respectable period of time. Let's go review that real quick. Operationalize acquisition campaigns separate from retention and reactivation campaigns. That's our job in marketing. Measure the investment and return cycles. Spend marginally to a return horizon. So if the CFO says, "Hey, I'm willing to go, I'm going to bet on you," and I'm going to explain why the CFO is going to bet on you in a minute, but I'm going to bet on you that if you go out and spend money, you can get me customers at a specific cost, and that you can manage your spend and report it only on the incremental results of your efforts, and that you won't acquire customers for more than $25 per customer because I won't be able to pay it off in 6 months. So I'm not giving you an allowance. I'm giving you a return horizon. Pay me back in 6 months. This is no different than what each of us does with our credit cards. The credit card company says, pay me back in 30 days. And you pay them back in 30 days, what do you get? You get a letter saying, we're going to increase your credit limit because you pay us back when you tell us you will. The same is true here in a larger relationship, okay? If you pay the company back for your investment and you produce a return thereafter, the credit company is getting payments from the merchants and your interest payments, then they want you to spend more. This is the transformation you're looking for. Establish that trust and you become an instrument towards driving the company's growth. Finally, optimize the contribution margin from retained and reactivated customers in order to fund acquisition. I'm going to go back here just for a second. What's really important here, you can accelerate growth by A, reducing the cost of acquisition, reducing that from -25 to -20, or by increasing the rate of return, which is reducing the cost of influence from your existing customers. Or you can just say, let's get better customers in the first place. So there's lots of ways of changing the dynamic of this flywheel. So if you don't understand the flywheel investment and return cycles, you don't deserve a seat in the boardroom. You really don't. Because if you're just spending to an allowance, you're not an executive. You're a middle manager. You're spending to an allowance. You're a cost center. If you can't operate the flywheel, you are a discretionary expense. If you can operate the flywheel and you can explain and prove that you're spending to a return cycle, you become a very attractive investment opportunity for the CFO. The CFO is sworn. He's a fiduciary of the shareholders. His obligation is to invest the treasury in the most lucrative forms of investment that it can. And if you can prove that your incremental spend is producing incremental yield and it's paying off in a period of time that beats his other investment opportunities, then he's obligated as a fiduciary to invest in growth. This is what you're striving for. Let's go look at this in one more, the fourth conversation. Did it create enterprise value? Now, I'm going to go back and talk about this. We've mentioned that this is really important. You've established over the period of 2 or 3 or 4 years that the numbers that here are pretty reliable. We can see that the retention rate is pretty steady, 25, 25, 25. The orders per buyer, 1.85, 1.9, 1.92, 1.96, 1.90. You can see that you've established a level of credibility. You pay your bills on time. This is what's coming from your existing customer base. And when you acquire net new customers, you're at 1.21 orders, 1.21, 1.20, 1. If you have accounting produce the fact table for you and you take the facts back to your CFO and say, I'm a credit-worthy risk. I produce consistent results here. You're going to get the investment in your business. This is why it's so important to establish facts as the first, and these are surprisingly stable. Now let's look at another way of dimensionalizing value. This is just age buckets, 12-month active, 13-month or more inactive. This is just age buckets, but there are other ways of dimensionalizing customer value as well. In this case, this is a little bit difficult to explain, but I want you to just follow me for a second. The bubbles here are groups of customers, and they're grouped by what was the category of merchandise that they bought when they made their first purchase. So when you see those big bubbles on the left-hand side, there's groups of customers who bought products from category B, and another group of customers who bought products from category D. Think of socks and ties, or purses and crossbody bags, or sneakers versus brown shoes, right? So these are categories of merchandise, and the people are organized by what did they buy first. The size of the bubble represents the number of orders we got from that group of people. The AOV on the vertical side, so the bubbles are oriented vertically by size of the order. They're oriented horizontally by how much contribution margin was thrown off by those customers over a 12-month period. So the customers over on the right-hand side who bought first from the Z, Y, and X categories threw off a lot of contribution margin at the end of the year, whereas those who bought from categories C, D, and B threw off far less contribution margin at the end of the year. Now, from a CFO's perspective, he's focused on A, B, C, and D. The reason he is because that's where 80% of his inventory is placed. The biggest capital risk the CFO has is in categories A, B, C, and D. But the biggest opportunity presented to the CMO is those customers who spend a lot and they retain at very high frequencies throughout the course of a year and years that follow. So now we begin to see that there are more ways than one to dimensionalize a customer from their behavior. I think, Catherine, you have some thoughts around dimensionalizing a customer through their engagement with loyalty programs.
Yeah, I do. And I think when we had looked at this previously, we were looking at how you could increase other category spend. So categories where you specifically know you've got high margin. So for me, the obvious one, because I love shoes and handbags, is if somebody always buys pants from you and they always come in and they get their staples, what can you do with that loyal customer to get them to even explore buying another product from you? And that, can be driven through using their points, using incentives, using challenges. There's lots of very interesting ways that you can incentivize for them to try something from another category. And chances are in these higher price brackets that you are going to have that higher margin as well.
I'm going to
Julia,
jump in
no, go for it.
that as you think about that slide with the flywheel was where we said we can accelerate growth by reducing the cost of acquisition. We can accelerate growth by increasing the contribution that flows from our existing customers to increase, lower the one and increase the other. Think about using loyalty programs where you are only expending cost when redemption occurs. You're only incurring cost when redemption occurs. How would you use loyalty programs to create higher LTV customers? Because if you can do that, A, you lower your risk because your cost is incurred only upon redemption, and B, the redemption can be modeled so that you almost fix the game where the contribution will increase at a rate that's accretive to the company. So this concept of understanding customer value through multiple dimensions is where you begin to understand, how do I create enterprise value? I can create enterprise value by getting customers to buy into categories that are more accretive to the company. I can create enterprise value by lowering the cost of that influence and creating more and more contribution value from each customer. And so as we begin to understand that customers behave differently through multiple different dimensionality, what it says is that if we have lots of diverse customer behavior, that is lifetime value, there's an N number of lifetime value segments. That means when we go to market, we should have N number of customer acquisition targets. And we should have N number of influence mechanisms to drive that LTV. So loyalty can become part of your mix to driving LTV. So it's matching N LTV over N CAC so that you can always achieve a return target that is within the return cycles that the CFO is expecting, but your array of tactics and strategies is limitless.
Yeah, I completely I completely agree on the loyalty side, honestly, because what I think I've heard many times, like, what's the difference between a campaign and a loyalty scheme? What's the difference between a promotions and a loyalty program? Well, you can do this once, or you can launch the same promotion over and over again. What you won't do, and what all the different tools you got within a loyalty scheme can do, is changing behavior over time and using things that are virtually priceless, okay, or don't have an actual cost to you in the moment, to drive the behavior forward with the ambition to get that reward at the end. And that is something that Dave, just like you said, can really increase the lifetime value by keeping the cost down. And that is a thin balance to keep between not frustrating the customer and keeping that ambition up, but it's a long-term play. And that is I think what really distinguishes a really cool loyalty scheme from one that is just there for the sake of being there, I would say, is this ambition of changing behavior over time and keeping this cost down at the same time.
Yep. So quick summary: identify customer lifetime value segments and expect them to be diverse. Respond to N number of LTV segments with N number of CAC targets. Shape your brand and your business strategy by optimizing lifetime value. It's by increasing the value of individual customers, not just increasing sales, but the value of customers, because cost is tied to customers. Retention and acquisition of customers is very expensive. If you can increase the lifetime value, you get more efficient return on your capital at risk. These are all shared between your CFO and CMO. And so now you begin to see how it can become one of the policing the marketing budget, to having a more collaborative co-investment strategy between these two leaders. So be more than a purchasing agent procuring media. Don't just be a purchasing agent. Be a co-equal strategist with the CFO, and think more deeply than Google Analytics. By the way, has it ever occurred to anyone that the single largest media platform in the world is Google? And the single largest server analytics that tells you how your money performed is Google. Does anybody see an inherent conflict of interest here? So think more deeply than just what Google Analytics tells us our media spend performed, and become a co-equal part of the strategy of the company and drive this sort of enterprise value through selectively focusing on customer segments that drive the most profit. Just wrapping up here, and we'll get to questions. Adopt a common language is conversation zero. The first conversation to actually begin your journey is prove what you caused and only take credit for what you caused, not what you attributed. Optimize on profit, because at the end of the day, the goal of every company is to generate profit. If you're intentionally diluting it by not running scale tests to understand the efficiency frontier of your curve, then you are diluting profits. Operate the flywheel, which is understand the investment and return cycle of customer acquisition and retention, and embrace diversity, and then respond diversely against that. Anybody has any questions, there's my email address, dave@lokes.com. I'm happy to follow up with any questions we don't cover today. But let's take a look at what we have in the question.
Sure. I'm actually going to hit you with one of my own because I can. Really interesting what you brought up about Google Analytics. And I haven't had that conversation for a long time, but there was a point where everybody was talking about building your house on rented land. And this kind of, when I was in marketing, Facebook overnight just decided that they were going to change how much they were charging or how much you could end up getting a lookalike audience for. So, I was only getting customers for an app, but it went from £5 to £15 overnight. Business model broke. And it was just almost impossible to get new users for anything less than that, because Facebook knew who those users were. They knew they were high value. And once they cottoned onto that, they were just making you pay more for them. So I just think it makes such a good case for that kind of 70-20 that you were talking about, and how much more you can get from incrementality in your current customer base. And it's why Antavo exists, I guess. So I'm going to hop into one from Ben, which I think almost every kind of head of CRM or head of loyalty is: how do you establish a baseline for redeemers so you prove that influence, like the actual nuts and bolts of, if I'm going in today, I want to make a case to my leadership for loyalty. How do I say, right, here's the baseline, and I'm going to show you an improvement on this? Like, what do I actually do to start off with?
So if you're just starting off with a loyalty program, the best way to do this is as I suggested earlier, holdouts will give you a incrementality factor very, very quickly. So what would happen if you set up your messaging cadence with everyone who signed up for loyalty, got a text message and or an email message? If you held out 2 or 3% of those and didn't respond to them at all, basically ignored them and did not provide them with any messaging around what the loyalty program provided, and send them when they've achieved their award levels or redemption levels, basically just took a small, tiny percentage of them and just ignored them entirely. And then we would have the ability to see the lift caused by the loyalty program and account for the cost. What is the incremental cost driving the incremental yield? And compare that against your holdout study, and you've got a very, very, very strong case as to what exactly your loyalty programs bring.
And in practicality, I think the most straightforward way of doing that would be to literally, in your ESP or marketing automation, literally add a flag to every 10th customer. And it doesn't mean that they don't earn the points. So they're part of the loyalty system if they've opted in, but you're perhaps just not communicating that to them. So they're not losing out, but you're just not sending them the push notifications. You're not sending them the emails. You're not tempting them in with any of the offers. You're just leaving it quiet and then seeing what the difference is between them and the people who it is heavily communicated to.
Yeah, and then you run the P&L that I showed on the previous slide.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. And I think you did touch on this one as well, but how would you figure out the optimal way to use your marketing budgets? So this is the point about if you can prove that to your CMO. So it's the kind of the coming back to the proving the incrementality, which you could do with that holdout study. And then you can use that to say, look, we get something like 5.3 times return on investment with a loyalty customer versus a normal. And if you can prove that, then that's how you can use your marketing budget, I guess.
That's exactly right. So you start with the channel reporting, but I prefer using platform reporting versus Google Analytics, and the very, very or Adobe Analytics or any other analytics package for the simple reason that, number one, not all media channels have the same click behavior. Google has engineered their UI to generate clicks. Why? Because they're the largest server attribution platform that counts clicks. So they've engineered the UI to generate clicks, whereas Facebook and Instagram does not engineer their UI to generate clicks. In fact, when I've run studies across multiple retailers, we see only about 1 in 6 orders are associated with the clicks, or 6 orders are associated with a view through to every click through order. And so you don't want to use server attribution, you want to use platform attribution. Then you want to run your lift studies. So Meta does not intentionally lie on their attribution. People say, oh, it's so inflated. Well, it's not inflated. Think about this. Server attribution has multiple people competing for the last click. Facebook only sees their views and their clicks. They don't see the clicks that are coming from emails and loyalty programs and text messages, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Server attribution counts all those clicks and gives a credit to only the last one. Facebook gives credit to all of them. So one's going to be bigger because there's no competition for last click attribution. But if you run the holdout study, you're only going to have a certain amount of lift. So you take the platform attribution minus the incrementality factor. So if I'm getting 70% incremental, take $1 million times 0.7, I have $700,000 in sales, not $1 million. Now I have to decrement my spend because I can't unsee that. And now I know that I'm not getting $1 million. I can't spend against $1 million. I have to spend against 700,000. I have to pull money off the table. I have to. So when you do that, what do? You say, well, I've always wanted to do connected television. I've always wanted to do direct to TV advertising where I can target individual home boxes. And then I wanted to follow up, and my CFO would never give me budget to do that. Or I always wanted to launch a loyalty program. My CFO would never give me budget. My CFO always said, well, you're just giving away money to customers who would buy anyways. But now I can say, I'm going to pull 30% off the table from my display campaign because I know it's not incremental. And I'm going to spend that 30% incremental in a channel that I have been wanting to fund but couldn't. And so now I'm beginning to optimize my spend across channels because I'm being honest about what I caused, not claiming what was attributed. And I'm showing responsibility by saying, I can't honestly and with integrity spend $1 million. I can only spend $700,000 now because I know what the incrementality factor is. I'm going to take that $300K and I'm going to put it into Antavo and build a loyalty program. I'm going to do the same thing there and do a lift study and prove what the incrementality of a loyalty program is. So this is how you begin to optimize across all of the opportunities that a marketing leader has. You begin to optimize based upon the incrementality factor. You add refinement to that by the conversation 3, which is, are we talking about customers or prospects? So am I acquiring, investing towards the future, or am I liquidating that investment cost by retaining? Yeah. So you always want to understand what is the incrementality of every channel, and then bifurcate that by acquisition of new customers versus retention of existing.
And the question here from Leah, which I think leads on very well from that, which is, what are the best platforms for tracking your customers through their lifetime journey? They've actually built an internal one through Power BI, but it relies very heavily on UTMs when it comes to campaigns. And anybody that's worked in marketing knows the pain of UTMs. So yeah, what's your advice there?
Starts the inherent flaw that you're waiting for a click, and many channels are very, very low click environment. And some channels are very, very low click. Meta is a very low click environment. Try clicking on a TV ad. There's no clicks there. So so UTM parameters are never going to solve that issue for you. So can you bring the question back up again? I just want to make sure I understand the first part of the question.
Yes. So what are the best platforms?
So each platform has its challenges. So Google is not very good at maintaining an audience because they don't require you to log in. You may have noticed over the last 2 years or so, Google's gotten very aggressive at asking you to log in. Like it used to go to YouTube and it would say your history, or it would bring up your history and you'd see what YouTube videos you're looking at. Now you can't. It says you have lost your history. You have to log in to see your history. What they're really trying to do is get you to log in so they can maintain an audience. So Google has historically had a really hard time maintaining audiences. So audience-based holdouts don't work in Google platforms. Whereas Meta, it works extremely well because you can't see somebody else's newsfeed. You can only see yours. And you only see yours because you must log in. If you must log in, Meta can maintain an audience. So audience-based holdouts are great in Meta. Geo-based holdouts work very well in Google. Now, you can't track your customer journey through geo holdouts, but you can establish an incrementality factor.
Great. Thank you so much. If you've got a follow-on question from that, Leah, please do put it into the Q&A channel. And Ben raises a really good point. So cost isn't just at redemption. So we did say, cost is when it's redemption. But of course, if they're using something like Antavo, there's a total cost of ownership involved in that. So you need to have a CRM manager, a loyalty manager. There's, a platform cost. So it's not just at redemption. But I think what you maybe more specifically meant was, it's not like you're chucking out money for an impression, you know, those things are kind of, I guess they're happening anyway. But yeah, what else did, maybe Julia, you have some thoughts on that one? I know that you've helped so many of our customers with pricing in their rewards, pricing in the total cost of ownership, and what really does it look like to get the ROI from launching with a platform like us?
Typically the categories apart from one, the reward cost is always the highest cost, and by far. I mean, I've seen cases where it was 10, 15 times as much as all the other costs summed up. So that's something that, and to be honest, if you are not willing to invest in the reward budget of the loyalty program, I'm not even sure if it's worth, not running one, to be honest, because what are you giving to your customers without value really in it? But I think overall is something that, it's the initial investment that you would just, how can I say it, just reflect back to on the overall profit that you're making, or the overall revenue you're making of the program. So it's a bit of an ongoing cost that you will need to count in. And that's why, sometimes it's a bit disheartening to see this big investment up front, and then companies just leaving the loyalty scheme there just to exist, without adapting it and optimizing it over time. And we're actually making it our own mission as well, like personal mission from my side, but like at Antavo too, that every program should be optimized as customer behavior changes, so you make the best out of it. Just because the initial investment of it, it's just going to stay with you and represent an extra cost too.
I mean, I think what I would think about that as well is you're communicating with your customers anyway, right? There's no chance that each brand doesn't have a comm strategy. So in terms of, how much I think that we charge for our platform, we charge a per member fee. So we try to align it with the brand's success, so they really only pay for members where they manage to grow their membership base. We do see them, we run EBRs all the time, and we do see that there's incrementality year on year. And, there's so many people are looking at loyalty now. And I think probably Dave and I come from a world where people have been talking about, the value of a customer you've already got being so much more than a brand new customer. But CMOs seemingly are always targeted on new customers, and that's just been like a fundamental flaw, and probably because of that language mismatch between CFOs. So I also read about a month or so ago that CMOs have the shortest tenure of any C-suite role. And it just says again that there's a big mismatch because they're looking at the potential. And I love that slide. I wanted to interrupt you, but I thought it was best to let you talk. That slide that talks about the difference in the two just says it all, is why that relationship massively falls down. And I think that the sooner that you can try to get on the same page, the better.
Yeah, establishing facts is the first step towards trust, and then explaining the diversity. Why do these customers behave this way and those customers behave that way? That's the role of the marketing leader. So establish the facts and then explain the phenomenon that you see in the facts, and then try to influence it. That's it.
And I'll just wrap up. I know that we're a little bit over time, but interesting to know, Dave, have you stress tested these studies and data with groups of CFOs?
Yeah, so I've worked in a lot of different retailers. I've established this relationship with CFO partners. The thing that I probably am most proud of in my career is that I have been able to repeatedly recreate this process where the CFO goes from a taskmaster who's saying, you have $2 to spend, don't spend it all in one place. And if you spend 50 cents more than that, your job might be at risk. Moving from that kind of a relationship to, hey, if you can do this at a $600,000 spend, can you scale this to a $6 million spend? Because if you can, I'll give you all the money you need. And the simplest way of proving that that's possible is just by looking in your mail, seeing the letters from your credit card company when they say, hey, we've increased your credit limit. Would you please spend more money? It's only because you've proven that you can pay back on time. And you can prove that your customers that you're acquiring, you can retain them and they can throw off profit and they can fund the investment, because the CFO doesn't have a choice. He's a fiduciary. He's obligated to invest the company's treasury in the most profitable outcomes. And if you can prove that you can acquire customers and pay back the investment costs at a finite period of time and do it repeatedly, he's obligated to invest in you. That's why I know the skills. Last point I would make on this point, I have spoken publicly at large retail conferences. Just a few months ago, I was in front of a room full of CFOs, about 60 CFOs from retailers across the globe, and gave this exact same presentation, and it landed extremely well. This is what a lot of people are looking for, is how do we build this trust between marketing and finance?
And is that the same between smaller or larger companies? Do you see that it's understood better at certain sizes, or is it kind of across the board?
It's a resource question. Doing what I've explained takes resource. It's not easy. I mean, just establishing customer facts is not a trivial task. So the larger the company, the easier it's going to be. However, the larger companies have the resources to execute the vision, but larger companies have more entrenched culture. Someone asked, I think it was Eva asked, why do we even have click attribution? Well, the main reason why we have click attribution is because it explains the past within a context or a paradigm that we used to accept as fact. And so as we move forward to something that's more factual, we can't just throw away the past. We have to carry that forward. So we'll carry a long baggage of click attribution, platform attribution, incrementality, mixed media. We'll carry all these forward, and we'll start saying, well, why does click tell us this and mixed media tells us that? And when you can explain phenomena, slowly you let go of the past. But in retailers, everyone knows who's in retail, we live by comps. How did we do this week, this last year? Or not just that, how did we do between 10 in the morning and 12 noon on this date last year? And how are we doing so far today, this year? We live on comps. So we're not going to get rid of click attribution, but we've got to build a platform for transitioning. And that's why I said culture resists change. And so that transition takes a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, before you begin to leave behind click attribution and begin to adopt a more advanced attribution methodology.
Great. Thank you so much. Julia, any closing thoughts from you?
Dave, honestly, one of the most inspirational things I've ever heard. Not the first time I hear it today from you, but honestly, I would hear it other 10 times. So I hope that everyone else enjoys as much as I.
Sorry, I think I have network issues, or Julia has network issues. If I'm still here, thank you so much, everybody. And for joining us. I'm sorry that we went over. I could speak to Dave about this all day long. And you can reach out to us if you want to talk about loyalty and what ROI would look like. That we run those workshops for free. And do feel free to reach out to Dave if you need to pick his brains anymore on this subject. So thanks, Dave, for your time. Thanks, everyone, for joining, and tune into our next webinar.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.